England, 1814, Thornfield County, Somersetshire. She thought his silence meant indifference. He thought his distance was noble. They were both wrong, and 7 years of unspoken truth stood between them like a wall neither had dared to cross. Until the morning he found her selling everything she had left. The market at Thornfield Cross. The morning fog had not yet lifted from the cobblestones of Thornfield Cross when Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Thornfield, brought his horse to an unhurried stop at the edge of the market square. He had not intended to stop at all. He had been riding since before sunrise, a habit born not of discipline but of necessity, the kind of necessity that had no name but pressed against the inside of his chest like a hand that would not release. Sleep had become a country he no longer knew how to reach, and the roads of Somersetshire at dawn were the only remedy he had found that came close to peace. He should have turned left at the crossroads, should have ridden past the square, past the flower stalls and the bread carts and the noise of a village waking, and continued south toward Thornfield Hall, where a stack of correspondence waited for him on the mahogany desk in his study. Correspondence he would read and answer and file with the mechanical precision of a man who had learned long ago that duty was the only structure that kept him standing upright. He should have turned left. He did not. Something made him pull the reins. Something quiet and sharp at the same time. An instinct with no clear source, the way a man sometimes stops walking without knowing why, only to find he has avoided a step that wasn't there. Sebastian's eyes moved across the square slowly, the way they always moved across any space he entered, cataloguing, measuring, deciding. The bread cart near the fountain, the elderly woman selling lavender bundles at the corner, 2 young farmers arguing over the price of something he could not see, a girl chasing a chicken between the legs of everyone who passed, and then his breath stopped, not dramatically, not with a gasp or a visible shudder. It stopped the way a clock stops, suddenly, completely, with no warning and no sound. One moment, there was air in his lungs. The next, there was not. She was standing at the jeweler's table near the east wall of the square. Her back was to him. He could not see her face, and yet he knew. He knew the way a man knows the shape of something he has memorized in the dark, not by seeing it, but by the specific weight it placed on the world around it. The way she stood, her spine straight despite everything her posture was quietly carrying. The pale blue of her dress, simple muslin, nothing like what she used to wear. The dark hair pinned at the back of her neck with a single ribbon that had come slightly loose on one side. A small, undone thing she would have fixed immediately if she had known, because Iris Pemberton had always been precise about such things. Iris, 3 years, 3 years, 2 months, and some number of days he had stopped counting, because counting had not helped. Sebastian sat entirely still on his horse, and he watched. She was placing something on the jeweler's table. Her hands moved carefully, too carefully, with the deliberate steadiness of someone fighting not to let their hands shake. The jeweler, a stout man with spectacles and a grey waistcoat, leaned forward to examine what she had placed before him. Sebastian watched the man pick it up, turn it, hold it toward the thin morning light. Pearl earrings. Even from this distance, even through the fog and the noise of the market and the 3 years of silence between them, Sebastian recognized them. His jaw tightened. He knew those earrings. He had been in the room the day her father gave them to her. Lord Edmund Pemberton, 2 weeks before the illness took his ability to leave his bed, had called Iris into his study and pressed them into her hands with fingers that already trembled. "They were your grandmother's," he had said, "and she was the bravest woman I ever knew. I want you to have them." Sebastian had been standing by the window. He had not been meant to witness it. He had been there for other reasons, reasons that lived in a different part of that memory, a part he was not prepared to open this morning. He watched Iris listen to the jeweler's offer. He watched something move through her shoulders. Not a flinch, exactly. Something quieter. Something she absorbed rather than showed. She nodded once. Sebastian's hand tightened on the reins. No. The word formed in his mind with the force and clarity of something that had always been true, something that had simply been waiting for the right moment to arrive at the surface. He dismounted before he had made any conscious decision to do so. The cobblestones were uneven beneath his boots. He was aware of the way the market shifted around him as he walked, the quick, involuntary straightening of postures, the lowered voices, the looks that darted away. He had grown accustomed to that effect long ago, the way a room or a street reorganized itself around the fact of his presence. He had never sought it. It had simply always been true. He reached the jeweler's table in less than a minute. The jeweler looked up first. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly behind his spectacles, and he straightened with the particular speed of a man who has just realized the social gravity of who is standing before him. "Your Grace." Iris turned. For one long, suspended moment, the noise of the market seemed to pull back, not disappear but recede, as though the square itself was giving the moment room. She looked at him. He looked at her. 3 years compressed into a single breath. She was thinner than he remembered. There were shadows beneath her eyes that had not been there before, not from illness, he thought, but from the particular exhaustion of carrying something heavy for a long time without setting it down. And yet she was still entirely, undeniably herself, the set of her chin, the directness in her dark eyes, the way she did not look away from him even as something complicated moved across her face. He recognized it. The complication. He had seen it the last time they had stood in the same room 3 years ago at her father's funeral. She had looked at him across the nave of St. Edmund's Church with an expression he had not been able to fully decode then, and he could not fully decode it now. Part of it was surprise, part of it was something older. "Lord Thornfield," she said. Her voice was steady. Whatever was happening beneath the surface of it, and something was, she had locked it behind a composure that would have fooled anyone who did not know her as precisely as he did. "Duke," the jeweler corrected automatically, then seemed to instantly regret the interruption. Iris did not correct herself. She simply held Sebastian's gaze with a steadiness that he recognized as the same one she had used at 16 to refuse a dance she did not want, at 19 to argue with her father's solicitor about the terms of a trust, and at 23 to stand at a graveside in the rain and not weep in front of anyone. It was the composure of someone who had learned that dignity was the one thing no circumstance could take without permission. "Lady Iris," Sebastian said. A pause. "I was not aware you had returned to Somersetshire," she said. Her eyes moved briefly, very briefly, to the pearl earrings still sitting on the jeweller's cloth and then back to him, quickly, a tell she had not intended. "I understood you were in London through the season." "I returned last week." He glanced at the jeweller. Something in his expression, something that required no words, communicated itself with complete efficiency. The jeweller took one step back, found something extremely interesting to examine on the far side of his table, and became very occupied with it. Sebastian looked at the earrings, then at her. "These belong to your grandmother," he said. It was not a question. Something shifted in her face. Just for a moment, a fraction of a second, the composure gave way to something rawer, something that she closed again so quickly he might have imagined it. But he had not imagined it. "They are mine to do with as I choose," she said. Her voice was quiet, precise. "I do not believe the market at Thornfield Cross falls under the jurisdiction of the Duchy of Thornfield, Your Grace." "It does not," he agreed, a beat. "I would like to purchase them," he said. The air between them changed. Iris looked at him for a long, careful moment. The morning light fell across the left side of her face. The fog had begun to lift while they were standing there, and the pale gold of it touched the edges of everything in the square with a reluctant warmth. "They are not for sale to you," she said. "They are for sale to whoever offers the correct price," Sebastian said. "I am offering it." "You do not know what price he offered." "I know it was not enough." Silence. Sebastian. His name in her mouth, the first time she had used it since before the funeral, since before the years of distance, fell between them like something dropped from a height. She seemed to realize it a half-second after she had said it, because something moved in her expression. A flicker. "I did not come here for—" She stopped, started again. "I do not require assistance." "I did not say you did," he said. "Then what are you saying?" He looked at her for one moment longer than was necessary. One moment in which several things moved through him at once. The memory of her father's face, The words spoken in a room that smelled of leather and medicine, and the particular sadness of a man preparing to leave. The 3 years of silence that Sebastian had chosen and could not entirely explain even to himself. "I am saying," he said, "that those earrings should not be here." He reached into his coat, placed the amount on the jeweler's cloth, more than the jeweler had offered, considerably more, without looking at the man. Then he picked up the earrings and held them out to her. Iris stared at them in his open palm. She did not take them. "You cannot simply—" she began. "I already have," he said. She took them. Not because she wanted to. He could see that clearly enough. The tight, controlled movement of her hand, the way she closed her fingers around them without quite meeting his eyes, the single, sharp breath she took through her nose that she would not have wanted him to notice. He noticed. "This changes nothing," she said very quietly. "I know," he said. She looked up at him then, directly, with all the complicated weight of everything that had not been said between them in 3 years, and before that, and longer than that. "Why are you back?" she asked. "Truly." Sebastian held her gaze. "Thornfield Hall requires attention," he said. "The north wing has been neglected. The tenants have concerns I have been addressing by letter when I should have been addressing them in person. All of it true. None of it the whole truth." She seemed to understand that, because she looked at him for one more moment, that measuring direct look that had always made him feel more visible than he was comfortable with. And then she turned away. "Good day, Your Grace," she said. He watched her walk back across the cobblestones, her spine straight, the pearl earrings enclosed in her hand. He stood at the jeweller's empty table for longer than he should have. The fog had finished lifting. The market was loud and warm, and entirely indifferent to the fact that something had just shifted in the architecture of Sebastian Vane's carefully maintained life. Something small and structural and irreversible. He turned back toward his horse. He had told himself 3 years ago that distance was the correct choice. He was no longer entirely certain he had been right. The north wing of Thornfield Hall smelled of dust and old fires and the particular silence of rooms that had been closed too long. Sebastian walked through it alone that afternoon. No housekeeper, no steward, no one whose presence would require him to maintain the expression he wore in company. He moved through the covered furniture and the grey light and the ghost of every occasion these rooms had witnessed, and he did not think about the north wing. He thought about her face. He thought about the careful way she had taken the earrings, the controlled precision of it, the thank you she had not said, and the defiance that had stood in the place of it. Not rudeness, never that, but the self-possession of a woman who did not intend to be made into someone who owed a debt to Sebastian Vane. He stopped at the window at the end of the hall. From here, on clear days, you could see across the valley to the low hills on the far side, and beyond them, though it was too far to see, the road that led to Pembridge Cottage, where Iris now lived, where she had been living since the death of Lord Mercer, her husband of 2 years, who had left her with 2 small lives to carry and a set of accounts that Sebastian, through certain quiet channels he had cultivated for reasons he had told himself were entirely practical, had discovered were considerably more disordered than anyone publicly knew. He had known about the accounts for 4 months. He had done nothing. He pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass of the window and looked out at the valley. Why had he done nothing? He knew the answer. He simply did not like it. He had done nothing because doing something required proximity. And proximity to Iris Pemberton, Iris Mercer, he corrected himself, though the correction felt wrong in a way he could not explain, had been the one thing Sebastian had denied himself with a discipline he had applied to nothing else in his life, with equal ferocity. He had been 23 when her father had called him into the study. He had been 23, and Lord Pemberton had been dying, and the room had smelled of medicine and autumn light, and the man had looked at him with eyes that were already beginning to lose their focus and had said, "Sebastian, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to understand that I am asking it because I trust you above every other man of my acquaintance." Sebastian had said, "Ask." And Lord Pemberton had said, "Watch over Iris." Simple words, the simplest possible words. Watch over Iris, not marry her, not love her, though Sebastian had already been doing that for 2 years without permission or announcement, in the private and complicated way of a man who had decided that what he felt was not relevant because it could not go anywhere useful. Iris had been 22 and brilliant, and entirely herself, and she had looked at him sometimes across dinner tables with an expression he could not interpret, and he had decided, rationally, correctly, that he was reading things into expressions that were not there. Lord Pemberton had said, "Watch over her," and Sebastian had said, "I will," and 6 weeks later, Lord Pemberton had died, and 4 months after that, Iris had married Lord Arthur Mercer. Sebastian turned away from the window. The memory of that morning, the morning he had received the announcement standing in his study in London with a letter in his hand that said what it said in plain English, requiring no interpretation, was not one he examined often. Not because it had broken him, he had not allowed it to break him, but because it had shown him, with a clarity that was almost clinical, the precise distance between what he had wanted and what had been true. She had not needed watching over. She had needed nothing from him at all. He had been so thoroughly certain that his silence, his restraint, his deliberate maintenance of the correct social distance between a duke and his neighbour's daughter had been the right choice, honourable, controlled, proper, that the announcement of her engagement had arrived like a cold correction. You waited, it said, and while you waited, she chose someone else. He was in his study by 7 o'clock, the lamps lit, the correspondence open on the desk before him, when Mrs. Hartley, his housekeeper, a woman of 50 years and approximately no tolerance for anything she considered unnecessary, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Caulfield is here, Your Grace," she said. "He says it is regarding the Pembridge tenancy accounts." Sebastian looked up. Caulfield was his land steward, a precise, humourless man who managed the Duchy's properties in Somersetshire with the efficiency of someone who had never in his life confused a personal feeling with a professional obligation. "Send him in," Sebastian said. Caulfield entered. He was a tall man, thin, with the look of someone who had spent a great deal of time outdoors in cold weather doing arithmetic. "Your Grace." He placed a folder on the desk. "You asked me last week to compile the current state of the Pembridge cottage tenancy. I have done so." Sebastian opened the folder. Caulfield had done thorough work. The accounts were laid out in clear columns. What was owed, what had been paid, what had not. Sebastian read through them in silence. His expression did not change. The arrears were significant. Not impossible. Not the arrears of someone who had been reckless or careless, but the arrears of someone who had been managing an inherited crisis on insufficient resources, making small payments against large debts with the meticulous desperation of someone who had not yet told anyone how bad it had become. Sebastian turned a page. There was a note in Caulfield's handwriting at the bottom. "The creditor in London, a Mr. Halloway of Halloway & Sons, has sent 2 letters in the past month. The second letter arrived last Tuesday. I have attached a copy." Sebastian removed the attached copy. He read it. His jaw tightened. The letter from Halloway & Sons was polite, in the way that threats were polite when they were written by solicitors, all correct form and careful language, wrapped around something that was stripped of its courtesies, an ultimatum. Further delay in settlement of the outstanding balance will necessitate legal proceedings in accordance with... Sebastian set the letter down. He looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it precisely in half, placed it in the inside pocket of his coat and said, "Thank you, Caulfield. That will be all." Caulfield, who had worked for Sebastian for 7 years and had learned to read the particular quality of his silences, nodded once and left without further comment. Sebastian sat alone with the lamp and the folder. Outside, the Somersetshire dark had settled fully over the valley. Somewhere beyond it, 2 miles, perhaps 2.5, Pembridge Cottage held its light against the night. He thought about the pearl earrings. He thought about what it had cost her to stand at that table and place them on the jeweller's cloth with steady hands. He thought about a promise made in a room that smelled of medicine and autumn to a man who had trusted him above every other man of his acquaintance. And he thought, for the first time in 3 years, that distance, while perhaps honourable, had not been particularly useful. It rained for 3 days after the market, not the soft, apologetic rain of early spring, but a proper Somersetshire rain, grey and committed and entirely indifferent to anyone's plans. The roads to Thornfield Cross became unreliable, and the valley between Thornfield Hall and the surrounding villages took on the particular closed quality of a landscape that has decided it would prefer to be left alone. Sebastian spent those 3 days doing the things he should have been doing for months, meeting with tenants, reviewing the North Wing accounts, writing letters to his solicitor in London, including one that concerned Halloway and Sons, and was written with the careful indirectness of a man who did not want it to be immediately obvious what he was arranging, or why. He did not ride past Pembridge Cottage. He made no attempt to engineer an encounter. He was not certain what he would say if he saw her again, and Sebastian Vane had a deep and long-standing aversion to entering situations without knowing what he was going to say. It was therefore entirely the rain's fault, or the fault of the particular pothole at the north end of the Fenwick Road, which the rain had deepened into something considerably more dramatic than a pothole, when his horse stumbled on the afternoon of the 4th day, and Sebastian found himself dismounting in front of a narrow gate in a stone wall that he recognized with a sharp and entirely unwelcome accuracy as the entrance to Pembridge Cottage. The horse was unhurt. Sebastian checked with a thoroughness that the animal bore with mild irritation, then stood in the rain holding the reins, assessing the road ahead, and concluding with the reluctant logic of someone who had been caught by circumstance rather than intention that the cottage gate was the nearest shelter. He pushed it open. She answered the door herself. This struck him, the absence of a footman, the immediate appearance of her own face when the knock sounded. She had clearly not been expecting anyone, because there was a small ink stain on her right hand, and she was still holding a pen, and her expression when she opened the door and found him standing in her rain-soaked entrance had the quality of someone whose face has run out of rehearsed expressions. "Your Grace," she said. "My horse," Sebastian said, "encountered the road." She looked past him at the horse, who was standing with the air of an animal that considered the whole situation beneath comment. "He appears uninjured," she said. "He is. The road, however, has made the ride back to Thornfield inadvisable for the next hour. I apologize for the intrusion." A beat. She stepped back. "Come in." The interior of Pembridge Cottage was small and warm, and nothing like what Sebastian remembered of her life in London or at her father's estate. And yet it was entirely, recognizably hers. Books stacked at angles that suggested they were actually being read rather than displayed. A small fire in the grate that cast the sitting room in amber and shadow. On the writing desk near the window, an open letter beside a ledger, both of which she crossed the room to close before he had a chance to see them. A movement so quick and controlled that he pretended not to notice it. He pretended very convincingly. She gestured toward the chair nearest the fire. He sat. She remained standing for a moment, with the look of someone recalibrating their afternoon, and then sat in the chair opposite. The rain against the windows was the only sound. Sebastian looked at the room, really looked, in the way he had learned to read spaces rather than just occupy them. The small economies visible in the details, the candles that had been burned well down before being replaced, the single vase on the mantel with dried flowers rather than fresh, the ledger she had closed, the ink on her hand that suggested she had been working on correspondence before he arrived, and that the correspondence had been the kind that required crossing things out. "You do not need to be careful about looking," Iris said. He glanced at her. She was watching him with the directness she had always possessed, unsettling he had always found it, in the specific way of something that refuses to let you keep your distance. "I know you have already noticed everything worth noticing. You always did." "I was not—" "You were," she said, not unkindly, simply as a statement of fact. He said nothing. She rose and moved to the side table where a tray had been set. She poured 2 cups of tea with the steady efficiency of someone who had long since stopped waiting for help with anything, and brought one to him without asking whether he wanted it. He took it. Their fingers did not touch. The space between them when she withdrew her hand was, nonetheless, something he was aware of in a way that was disproportionate to its physical dimensions. "You have been managing things alone," he said. "I have been managing things well," she said, sitting again with the tea in both hands. "Those are different statements." "Are they?" "Yes," she met his gaze. "One is a fact, the other is a judgment. He considered this. "Halloway and Sons," he said. The air changed. It was subtle, a slight shift in the set of her shoulders, a fraction of stillness in her face that was different from the controlled composure she had been maintaining. He had been watching for it, and he saw it, and he had enough decency to regret, briefly, that he had used it. "How do you know about that?" she asked. Her voice was still even, barely. "My steward manages the Pembridge tenancy accounts," he said. "The letter came to him by misdirection. I do not believe it was intentional." A silence. "I see," she said. "Iris, you have no obligation here," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Whatever you believe you owe to my father's memory, or to the county, or to any other abstract principle, it does not extend to my private financial circumstances. I am managing them." "With your grandmother's earrings," he said. The words were quiet, not an accusation, just the truth placed between them. She looked at him. For one moment, just one, just long enough for him to see it, something behind her composure shifted, not broke, shifted, like light changing direction. "That was one solution to one specific problem," she said. "There are others." "I know," he said. "I would like to discuss them with you." "Why?" He looked at her across the amber firelight, at the ink on her hand and the closed ledger and the controlled dignity of a woman who had been carrying something heavy and alone for a very long time, and he thought about how to answer that question honestly without answering it completely. "Because I made a promise," he said, "that I have not adequately kept." Iris set her teacup down. She looked at him for a long, careful moment. "What promise?" she asked. And Sebastian, who had spent 3 years deciding that some things were better left unspoken, and who was beginning to understand the precise cost of that decision, said, "To your father." The rain went on. The fire crackled and settled. And Iris Pemberton sat very still across from him, with an expression that held, beneath its surface, beneath the composure she would not surrender, the shadow of a question she had not yet asked. He could see her deciding whether to ask it. He found himself, for reasons he could not have explained to anyone, hoping that she would. He left when the rain softened enough to make the road passable. Iris stood at the window and watched him go. Watched the broad set of his shoulders and the controlled ease of how he mounted. The unhurried way he turned his horse toward the road as though departing was a simple thing that required no particular effort. She had known Sebastian Vane for 7 years. She had spent 7 years being intermittently certain that she understood him, followed by the particular humiliation of discovering that she had not. "A promise to your father." She turned away from the window. The fire had burned lower. The sitting room was darker now and quieter, and she was alone with the closed ledger on the desk, and the dried flowers on the mantel, and the sound of the rain finishing itself against the glass. She crossed to the desk. She did not open the ledger. Instead, she stood with both hands flat on the surface of it and looked at nothing in particular and let herself feel for precisely 60 seconds the full weight of what it had cost her to sit across from Sebastian Vane in this small, warm room and speak evenly and hold her tea with steady hands and not ask the one question that had been living in the back of her mind for 3 years. Why did you stay away? He had been her father's most trusted friend. He had stood in the church at her wedding with a face that was entirely closed, entirely polished, entirely unreadable. The face he presented to the world when the world was not to be trusted with whatever he was actually thinking. She had seen that face many times. She had spent years learning to read the geography of it, and she had spent 3 years telling herself that what she thought she had seen, in the moments before he had perfected that blankness, had been a projection, a mistake. The wishful thinking of a woman who had been about to marry a man she did not love and was looking for reasons to believe there was something else available to her. She had been practical. She had done what was sensible. She had married Lord Mercer, who was kind in a distant sort of way, and who had promised stability, and she had made herself content with stability for 2 years, and then Lord Mercer had died and left her the stability in ruins, and she had stood at his graveside in January rain and felt, beneath the grief for a man she had respected if not loved, the particular cold clarity of a woman who has run out of practical choices. She opened the ledger. The numbers were what they were. She had been over them enough times to have them memorized, and memorizing them had not changed them, But she went over them again anyway, because it was more productive than thinking about the way Sebastian had said, "I made a promise that I have not adequately kept," in a voice that had contained something underneath it she could not name. She was on the third column when she found the letter. It had been placed, folded, sealed with plain wax, no crest, inside the back cover of the ledger. She did not know how it had gotten there. She had not put it there. The ledger lived on this desk and nowhere else, and the only person who had been in this room today, other than herself, was... She picked it up. Her name was written on the front, in a hand she recognized instantly, because it was the hand of a man who wrote as he spoke. Precise, economical, nothing wasted. Lady Iris. She stared at it. She turned it over. The seal was unbroken. She thought about not opening it. She opened it. "Lady Iris, I have written this letter 4 times. The previous 3 versions were more articulate. This one is merely honest. I am not writing to address the matter of the Halloway account. I have taken steps in that regard, and they do not require your approval, though I understand that will concern you, and I ask only that you allow me to explain before you object. I am writing because this morning at the market you asked me why I returned. I gave you an answer that was true but incomplete. Thornfield Hall does require attention. The tenants do have concerns. Both of these things are real, but they are not why I came back. I came back because 4 months ago I received information about your circumstances, and I sat with it for 4 months without doing anything, and I could not continue to justify that inaction, not to your father's memory, and not to myself. You will note that I am still not telling you the whole of it. I am aware of that. I am telling you only what I am able to tell you in a letter, which is less than everything and more than nothing. I will call on you tomorrow, if you will permit it. There are practical matters to discuss that are better discussed in person. I remain, as I have always been, yours." S. Vane Iris read the letter twice. Then she set it down on the desk with a care that was disproportionate to the lightness of the paper. "As I have always been." She pressed 2 fingers to her mouth. "As I have always been yours." She looked at those words for a long time. She thought about everything they could mean, and everything they might not mean, and the dangerous, inadvisable warmth that had moved through her chest when she had read them. A warmth she recognized because it was not new, because she had been managing it with varying degrees of success for most of the 7 years she had known him. She thought about practical matters. She thought about tomorrow. She folded the letter along its original crease and held it in both hands and looked at the fire. Not the whole of it, he had said. She wondered what the whole of it was. She was afraid, and it was a specific kind of afraid, the kind that lives right next to hope, that she already knew. He arrived at 10 o'clock, precisely 10, not 1 minute early, not 1 minute late, which was so entirely Sebastian that Iris had almost smiled when she heard the knock and checked the clock on the mantel. She had spent the morning reminding herself of several important facts, that she was a widow of 24, with obligations and responsibilities and very little room for the kind of thinking she had been doing since she read that letter. That Sebastian Vane was a duke with a duchy and a London season, and any number of far more suitable options for the application of his attention. That, as I have always been, yours could be read in a perfectly conventional epistolary sense by anyone who was not actively looking for another meaning in it. She had been moderately successful at reminding herself of these things. She was less successful the moment she opened the door. He was wearing dark blue, the coat of a man who had dressed with attention and chosen not to be obvious about it, which was so precisely him that the warmth in her chest arrived before she had given it permission. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She stepped back to let him in. She had made the decision, somewhere between midnight and dawn, that she was going to address the letter directly. She was not going to be indirect about it, or pretend she had not read it, or perform an ignorance she did not possess. That had been a habit of her younger self, the careful social navigation of a woman who had been taught that directness was a liability. She had spent 2 years being married to a man who had appreciated her composure and had no idea what it was containing, and she had emerged from that marriage with a revised relationship to her own silences. She was not going to be silent about this. She waited until they were both seated in the sitting room, Tea again, the same chairs, the fire lower in the morning light. And then she said, "I found the letter." Sebastian had the particular stillness of a man who had expected this and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I thought you might," he said. "You left it deliberately." "Yes." "In my ledger." It seemed less confrontational than handing it to you directly. "It was not less confrontational," she said. "No," he agreed. "I realize that now." A pause. "You said you have taken steps regarding the Holloway account," she said. "What steps?" "I have instructed my solicitor to purchase the debt," he said. "The arrangement will be renegotiated under terms that are considerably more," a slight pause, "reasonable." Iris looked at him. "Sebastian," she said very carefully, "you cannot simply purchase my debt." "It is done," he said. "I recognize that presents you with a different problem." "It presents me with several." "I know," he held her gaze. "I know what it costs you to receive this kind of help. I know what it means to you, what independence means to you. I have known you for 7 years, and in 7 years I have never once seen you ask for anything you felt you could obtain by yourself." He paused. "That is not a criticism. It is the reason I put the letter in the ledger, rather than standing here and telling you what I had done. I wanted you to have time to be angry before I arrived." She stared at him. "That is," she said after a moment, "a very specific kind of manipulation." "It is," he said. "I am not proud of it." "And yet you did it." "Yes." She looked at him, really looked, with the direct, searching attention she had always given him, and that he had always received with a wariness she had never entirely understood. "What is the whole of it?" she asked. He did not pretend not to understand the question. For a moment he was quiet. Not the silence of a man stalling, Sebastian Vane did not stall, but the silence of a man choosing with care where to begin. "When your father called me into his study," he said, "the week before he died, he asked me to watch over you." "I know," she said. "He told me he had spoken to you." Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. "Slightly." "He told you." "He said he had asked you to keep an eye on things." She watched his face. "He did not tell me what you said." "I said yes," Sebastian said. "And then I married Lord Mercer," she said. "And you went to London." A beat. "Yes," he said. "For 3 years." "Yes." "That is not," she said quietly, "what I would call watching over someone." He looked at her. The morning light was full through the windows now, and it lay across the sitting room with the honest clarity of a day that had decided to be without softness. She could see the precise quality of what was in his face, the thing he had been keeping behind the discipline and the controlled courtesy. And she had been right. She had been right about what it was. She had not been projecting. She had not been inventing meaning in expressions. "No," he said, "it is not." "Then why?" she asked. Her voice was even. She had worked hard for that evenness, and she was proud of it, and she was also aware that it was barely containing something that had been waiting a very long time. "Why did you go?" Sebastian set his teacup down. He looked at her with the particular attention of a man who has decided that a door he has kept closed for a long time is going to be opened, and that he is going to open it with the same control he applies to everything else, because it is the only way he knows how. "Because watching over you," he said, from a distance close enough to be useful, required a kind of discipline I was not certain I possessed. Silence, the fire, the light, the sound of a bird somewhere outside. "Sebastian," she said, "I am not—" He stopped, started again. "I am not saying this to complicate your situation further. I am aware that your situation is already complicated. I am saying it because you asked me directly, and because I have spent 3 years giving you incomplete answers, and because your father asked me to be someone you could trust, and I cannot be that person while also being dishonest." Iris looked at him. Her hands were very still in her lap. "How long?" she asked. 7 years, he said quietly. "Since the winter of 1807. Since your father's Christmas dinner, when you argued with me about Aristotle for 2 hours, and I rode home in the dark realizing I was completely lost." She absorbed this. It took a moment. She thought about the wedding, about the expression she had not been able to read across the nave of St. Edmund's, that she had spent 2 years telling herself was professional courtesy and 4 months beginning to wonder about. She thought about the 7 years of dinners and country assemblies and long conversations over her father's library table, all the moments in which something had been present that neither of them had named. "You never said anything," she said. "No." "Why not?" His jaw tightened slightly. The smallest movement, the tell of a man touching a wound he had not expected to reach this quickly. "Because I decided," he said, "that what I felt was not relevant unless it could be of use. And I could not determine a version of it that was of use. So you said nothing." "So I said nothing." "And I," she said slowly, "interpreted your silence as—" She stopped. "As what?" he asked. She looked at him. "As absence of feeling," she said, "which led me to conclude that the most practical choice available to me was to accept Lord Mercer's offer." The quiet that followed was not comfortable. It was the quiet of two people looking at the same thing from opposite sides and understanding at the same moment that the shape of it was very different from what either of them had described it as. "We were both," Sebastian said, "very practical." "We were," she agreed, "a beat. And very foolish," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. And then, for the first time since he had found her at the jeweller's table, for the first time since the fog and the pearls and the 3 years of silence, something in her face softened, not capitulated, softened, in the specific way of a woman who has been carrying her guard for a long time and has just decided to set it down. Not because the danger is gone, but because she has determined that the person across from her is worth the risk. "Yes," she said. "We were." He invited her to Thornfield Hall 4 days later, not in any way that could be described as improper, a letter correctly formal, extending an invitation to view the restoration plans for the North Wing, which she had some years ago expressed an opinion about during a dinner at her father's estate, and which Sebastian had, for reasons he was no longer pretending were entirely architectural, thought she might like to see. Iris had read the letter twice. Then she had written back, "I accept." Thursday at 2, she arrived in a carriage that was smaller and quieter than anything that should have been pulling up to Thornfield's entrance, driven by a man who appeared to be the cottage's general factotum rather than a proper coachman. Sebastian watched from the window of his study as she descended without waiting for assistance, looked up at the facade of the house with the considering expression of someone who had not been here in years and was recalibrating their memory of it, and then straightened her gloves and walked toward the front steps with the unhurried composure of a woman who intended to be entirely in control of this afternoon. He found himself almost smiling. He found that interesting. The North Wing tour was genuine. Sebastian had the restoration plans spread on the library table, and he walked her through them with the attention of a man who was actually interested in the subject, which he was because Sebastian Vane was incapable of performing interest he did not feel, and the restoration of the North Wing had been occupying a real portion of his consideration since his return to Somersetshire. But it was also true that the way she engaged with the plans, pointing out things he had not considered, asking questions about the original construction that demonstrated she had been paying attention to this house over many years, made the afternoon expand in a way he had not anticipated. She remembered things about Thornfield that he had forgotten. She remembered which window in the old morning room faced east and how the light came through it in the early hours. She remembered a crack in the plaster above the second landing that his father had refused to fix on the grounds that it gave the house character. She remembered, and this one arrived quietly without announcement, that the library table was the one at which he had been sitting when she was 14 years old and had come to Thornfield with her father and had wandered in here and found him reading and had said with the directness of a child who had not yet learned to be diplomatic, "That book looks extremely boring, is it?" He had told her it was not boring and had explained to her at length why. She had stayed for 2 hours. He had not thought about that afternoon in years. He thought about it now, standing in the library with the afternoon light falling through the tall windows, and found that the memory carried a warmth he was not prepared to name. "You remember the east window," he said. "I remember everything about this house," she said simply, and then seemed to decide that was more than she had intended to reveal, because she looked back at the plans with renewed attention. He let it pass. He almost didn't. They walked in the garden at 4 o'clock. The Thornfield garden in early spring was not at its most persuasive. The formal beds were still thin, the roses not yet committed to their season, the hedges clipped to a precision that made them look slightly severe. But the kitchen garden along the south wall was a different matter, already green and purposeful, and they walked there in the low afternoon light with the conversation that had been building all day, settling into something quieter and more honest than either of them had been quite managing indoors. Iris stopped at the wall where the first roses had begun to push through, small, tight buds, still mostly hidden, barely a suggestion of what they would become. "He used to talk about you," she said without preamble. Sebastian stood beside her. "Your father?" he said. "Yes." She was looking at the roses. "After your visits, he would say—" She paused, selecting the memory. "He would say that you reminded him of what he hoped to have been at your age. Decided, he called it. He admired that in you." "He was too generous," Sebastian said. "He was not, actually," she said. "He was precise. He did not say things he did not mean." She turned to look at him. "He told me once that he trusted you more than any other man he knew. He said it the way he said things that mattered, quietly, like they were simply facts." She paused. "I thought you should know that." Sebastian looked at her. The light was low and warm, and it touched the side of her face with the particular gold of late afternoon, and he was standing close enough, not inappropriately close, just close, the natural proximity of two people who had stopped at the same point to look at the same thing, that he could see the slight unsteadiness in her breath. "Iris," he said. It was not a statement. It was not a question. It was simply her name, said in a way that was different from the measured way he had been saying it all afternoon, different from the way he had said it at the market and in the cottage. It was her name said with everything underneath it, without the armor. She looked at him. He watched her decide, not whether she felt what she felt. He could see that she did, and he thought she could see that he knew, but whether she was going to let it be real, whether she was going to step from the careful, practical distance they had both maintained for 7 years into the territory that had always existed just beyond it. Her hand was at her side. He reached out, slowly enough that she could have moved, could have chosen otherwise, and took it. Her fingers, after a single still moment, turned and held his. The garden was quiet. The roses were barely begun. "I should have spoken," he said. "Before the announcement, before any of it. I should have told you." "Yes," she said. Her voice was not accusing, it was just true. "You should have." "I know. And I," she said quietly, "should have asked. Instead of deciding, I knew the answer." He looked at their joined hands, her pale glove, his darker one, the simple fact of the contact. "What do we do now?" she asked. He looked up. She was watching him with that direct, undefended gaze, the one that had always made him feel more visible than he was comfortable with, and that he had, over 7 years, come to understand was not a challenge, but an offering. She looked at people the way she looked at things she intended to understand. She was looking at him that way now. "Now," he said, "I would like, if you are willing, to begin again." "Begin what, specifically?" she said. And there was something in it, just a thread of the old directness, the 14-year-old who had walked into his library and asked if his book was boring. That made it impossible not to feel something shift in his chest. "Everything," he said, properly, this time. Iris looked at him. The late light held them both. "That," she said quietly, "is the first entirely honest thing you have said to me since the market." "No," he said. "It is the first entirely honest thing I have said to you in considerably longer than that." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "All right," she said. "Begin again." The invitation to Lady Ashton's spring ball arrived at Thornfield Hall on a Monday, and at Pembridge Cottage, Sebastian was fairly certain, on the same day. He thought about this. He thought about what it would mean for Iris to attend, the questions that would follow a widow's reappearance in county society, the particular attention that would be directed at a woman alone, without protection or alliance, navigating an event at which half the county would be present, and all of the county's tendency toward observation would be active. He thought about what it would mean if he was there too. He sent a note to Pembridge Cottage. "Will you attend?" I asked, because the answer affects whether I consider it worth attending myself. And then he had read that back and written a second, more measured version. "Will you attend Lady Ashton's ball?" I should be glad to know. Her reply had arrived the following morning. I had not planned to, but I find myself reconsidering. He had stood at his desk and read that 7 words longer than was necessary. Lady Ashton's ballroom was everything Somersetshire considered its finest achievement. High plaster ceilings, candlelight in clusters, the smell of beeswax and hothouse flowers, and the assembled social weight of a county that had been watching the Pembridge situation with the polite intensity of people who had nothing more urgent to focus on. Sebastian arrived at 8. He had been in the room for approximately 4 minutes when Lady Ashton appeared at his elbow with the specific speed of a woman who had been watching the door. "Your Grace," she said. "What a surprise. We had not expected you this season." "I have returned to the county," Sebastian said. "It seemed appropriate to attend." Lady Ashton, a woman of 50 with sharp eyes and the social precision of someone who treated information as currency, smiled the smile of a person assembling a picture. "And will we be seeing much of you this season?" she asked. "Or is this a brief visit?" "I have not yet determined the length of my stay," he said. This was not entirely true. He had already instructed Coalfield to proceed with plans for the North Wing that would take the better part of the year. He had already notified his solicitor in London that correspondence should be redirected to Thornfield Hall as his primary address for the foreseeable future. He had not told anyone this. He was telling himself it was because plans could change. He was aware that this was not the actual reason. He saw Iris at 8:20. She entered from the far end of the room, alone, in pale green, with her dark hair dressed simply and the pearl earrings at her ears, and something in the careful deliberateness of her composure that told him this had cost her something. Not the dress or the earrings. The act of being here. The decision to walk into a room full of people who knew her circumstances and to stand in it without apology. He watched several heads turn. He watched the quality of the turning, the quick assessments, the murmured exchanges behind fans, the particular social mathematics of a room recalculating the significance of a widow's reappearance. He crossed the room. Not quickly. Quickly would have been noticed and interpreted. At a pace that was deliberate without being urgent, the pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going and had decided that anyone who chose to observe it was welcome to their interpretation. He reached her before anyone else could. "Lady Iris," he said. She looked at him. A slight exhale, just barely visible, just enough to tell him that his arrival was a relief she hadn't let herself count on. "Your Grace," she said. He offered his arm. She took it. And the room, with the collective efficiency of a social organism that had just received a clear and unambiguous signal, reorganized itself accordingly. He felt the shift. Iris felt it too. He could tell by the fractional straightening of her posture, the settling of something in her shoulders. They walked the room together. He introduced her to the 3 people he thought would be useful for her to know, and kept her neatly away from the 2 he thought would not. She noticed all of it. He could tell because she was Iris and she noticed everything, and she said nothing about it except a single quiet remark when they paused near the window. "You are very good at managing a room." "So are you," he said. "You simply prefer not to." She looked at him. "That is accurate," she said. He found himself again, almost smiling. Lady Ashton found them at 9:30, near the refreshment table, with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for a strategic moment. "Lady Iris," she said warmly, "how lovely to see you again. We were so sorry to hear of your circumstances. Such a difficult time." The warmth was real, which made what followed more effective. "I do hope you are managing. There have been some concerns, I know. The Pembridge accounts. One hears things." "Lady Ashton," Sebastian said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Lady Ashton stopped. He looked at her with the full, direct, entirely controlled attention of a man who has decided that this particular conversation is going to end here. "Lady Iris's affairs," he said, "are in excellent order." A pause. One beat, precisely measured. "I would be reluctant to see otherwise implied." Lady Ashton absorbed this. She was not a stupid woman. She understood what was being communicated, not just about Iris's finances, but about the fact of his standing here beside her, the arm he had offered at the door, the evening's visible allegiance. "Of course," she said. "Of course, I only meant—" "I am certain you meant kindly," Sebastian said, pleasantly. "As you always do." Lady Ashton smiled with the precision of someone retreating in good order. "Indeed. Do excuse me. I see the Ashworth party has arrived." She moved away. The silence that followed held several things at once. Iris looked at him. "You did not have to do that," she said. Her voice was quiet, careful. "I know," he said. "She will tell everyone." "I know," he said again. A pause. "Is that," she said slowly, "what you intended?" He looked at her. At the pearl earrings and the pale green dress, and the composure that had, tonight, been carrying more than it usually had to. "I told you," he said, "that I intended to begin again. Properly." She held his gaze. Something moved through her expression, something that was not quite surprise and not quite not surprise, and was entirely, unmistakably, a woman allowing herself to feel something she had been being careful about. "You are," she said quietly, "a very decisive man." "So my father's portrait implies," he said. And she, for the first time, genuinely, without the controlled composure in the way, laughed. He told her everything 2 weeks later. Not in a ballroom or a garden or a market square. In the library of Thornfield Hall in the early evening, with the fire lit and the lamps turned low and the rain, softer this time, the first real spring rain, against the tall windows. She had come to return a book she had borrowed. She had stayed because neither of them had suggested she shouldn't. They were sitting on opposite ends of the long sofa nearest the fire, not close, not far, the distance of two people who were being careful with themselves, and she had her legs tucked beneath her in the unself-conscious way of someone who had forgotten to maintain her formality. And he had his jacket off, and his cravat slightly loosened, and he looked, she had thought when he walked back from the bookcase, like the most exhausted and the most present she had ever seen him at the same time. "Tell me something true," she said. It was something she used to say years ago, at her father's table in the long evenings when the three of them would sit in the library and talk about everything that was worth talking about. She used to say it when the conversation had been polite for too long, and she wanted to cut through to something real. Sebastian looked at her. "I thought about writing to you," he said. "After the wedding, after the first year, every time I heard anything, your father's estate being settled, Lord Mercer's appointment, He stopped. "Every time. I wrote 3 letters. I sent none of them. Why not? Because I could not determine what I was entitled to say." He looked at the fire. "I was not your family. I was not. I had no formal claim on any right to be heard. I had made my choices. The silence was mine." "What did the letters say?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "The first one said that I hoped you were well, and that your father would have been proud of you." He paused. "The second one said that I had been wrong to stay silent before the engagement, and that I was sorry, and that I understood if you were happy, and that I hoped you were, and that this letter was not designed to complicate that in any way." "And the third?" she asked. He looked at her. "The third said the truth," he said. "All of it." "Which is?" she asked. He held her gaze. "That I loved you," he said. "That I had loved you for 7 years, since 1807, since I understood far too late and far too clearly exactly what you were to me, and chose silence instead of courage, only the realization, later than it should have been, that it was there. That my silence before the engagement was not restraint. It was cowardice. That I told myself it was honorable, and it was not. It was fear." He paused. "That I went to London because staying within reach of you while you were someone else's wife was—" the word came carefully, Impossible. That I am aware I forfeited the right to say any of this, and that I am saying it now because you asked me for the truth, and because I have given you everything else and I do not know how to give you less than this. The fire settled. The rain ran down the windows. Iris sat very still. She was looking at him with the full, direct, undefended attention she gave to things she was trying to completely understand. And he held it, because he was done flinching from it, because being truly seen by her was frightening and necessary and entirely worth it. "Sebastian," she said, "you don't have to—" "I knew," she said. He went still. "Not clearly," she said quickly. "Not with certainty. But—" She pressed her lips together for a moment, composing something. I knew something," she said again. Her voice was careful, not hesitant but precise, the way she was precise about things that mattered. Her hands were still in her lap. The fire threw a warm, unsteady light across the side of her face, and Sebastian watched her decide, word by word, how much of this she was going to say. "There were moments," she said, "across the years. Moments where I was almost certain, where something in the way you looked at me or didn't or left a room at a particular time. I would think, there it is. And then you would be entirely yourself again, composed and correct and perfectly measured, and I would think that I had invented it." She paused. "I became very skilled at convincing myself I had invented it." "You had not," he said. "I know that now." She looked at him steadily. "I knew it, I think, somewhere beneath the practical part of me that was very determined to be sensible. A beat. Lord Mercer was kind. He was decent. He did not deserve a wife who was—" She stopped, choosing carefully, "who was looking for something he was not. Iris, I am not asking for absolution," she said. "I am telling you the truth. You asked for honesty. I am giving it." She met his eyes. "I was not in love with my husband. I was grateful for him, and I respected him, and I mourned him when he died, genuinely, but I was not in love with him, and I think I always knew why." Sebastian looked at her. The words were between them now, all of them, his and hers both, laid out with the careful honesty of two people who had spent too long being articulate about everything except this. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was quiet, direct, the question stripped of ceremony. She looked at him. "I want," she said slowly, "to not be practical for once." A pause. The faintest lift at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated than that. Something that held all 7 years in it. "I want to not calculate the consequences for one evening and simply—" She exhaled, and the exhale released something she had been holding. "I want to say yes, to whatever beginning again means, to you." Sebastian did not move immediately. He looked at her for a moment longer. The firelight and the dark hair and the directness she had never once in 7 years turned away from him. And then he rose from his end of the sofa and crossed the small distance between them, and he sat beside her, close now, the warmth of him a fact rather than a suggestion. He reached up and tucked the loose strand of hair, the same one that had come undone at the market, the same small undone thing, back from her face. His fingers barely touched her cheek. She went very still. Not the still of discomfort, the still of a woman paying complete attention to a single point of contact, the way you are still when something you have been waiting a long time for finally arrives and you do not want to move and end it. "I have wanted to do that," he said quietly, "since the market." "Only since the market," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "No," he said, "not only since the market." She turned her face toward him. They were close, closer than they had been in the garden, closer than the sitting room visits and the library plans and the ball had allowed, close enough that she could see the precise dark blue of his eyes and the slight tension at the edge of his jaw that she recognized as the last of his restraint. "Sebastian," she said. "Yes," he said, not answering a question, just yes, to everything. He kissed her, not quickly. Not with the urgency of something contained too long, though it had been, not with haste or desperation. He kissed her the way he did most things, with complete, controlled, deliberate attention, his hand at the side of her face. her breath catching at the first touch and then settling into it, settling into him, her hand rising to his lapel and closing there. It was not a long kiss. It did not need to be long to be everything. When he drew back, she kept her eyes closed for one moment, just one, and he watched her face in that moment with the quiet intensity of a man committing something to permanent memory. Then she opened her eyes. 7 years, she said. 7 years, he agreed. We were, she said, extraordinarily foolish. We were, he said. I more than you. Considerably more, she agreed. And this time the smile arrived fully. The real one, the one he had seen across dinner tables and garden paths and library afternoons for 7 years, and had never once allowed himself to respond to correctly. It changed her face entirely. It made her look like herself, the self beneath the composure, the one she kept for people she trusted. She was giving it to him. He felt the weight of it land exactly where it was meant to. You owe me 7 years of honesty, she said. I intend to pay them, he said. She looked at him. All at once or in installments. Whichever you prefer, he said. I am, at this point, prepared to be extremely accommodating. That, she said, is very unlike you. I know, he said. I thought it was time to try something different. She laughed, softly, warmly, the laugh of a woman who has finally set something heavy down and discovered that her arms still work perfectly well. Her head tilted against his shoulder, a small natural movement, as though it had always been the right place for it to go. His hand, very gently, covered hers. The rain ran down the windows. The fire burned. The library of Thornfield Hall held them both in its warmth and its old book quiet, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence was the best kind, the kind that does not need to be filled. Spring arrived in Thornfield County with the particular commitment of a season that has decided it means business. The roses along the kitchen garden wall opened all at once, as though they had agreed on a date. The valley turned from its winter brown to something green and certain, and the roads dried, and the mornings came earlier, full of light that had an actual warmth in it rather than just the suggestion of one. Sebastian noticed all of it. He noticed it in the specific way of a man whose attention had been returned to the world. Not that he had been absent from it, not precisely, but he understood now the difference between moving through a landscape and actually inhabiting it. He had been moving through things for 3 years. He was no longer moving through them. He was living in them. So it was, he thought, riding out across the Thornfield estate on a Tuesday morning in April, with the light coming sideways through the new leaves and the sound of the valley carrying up the hillside, an entirely different experience from anything he had been doing before. He thought about what his father had said once in this same library, when Sebastian had been young enough that he had not yet learned to maintain the distance that came later. The trouble with discipline, Sebastian, is that it is very effective. It will keep out everything you want to keep out. It will also keep out everything you did not mean to. He had not at the time understood what his father meant. He understood it now. Iris was in the Thornfield garden when he returned. She had taken to coming on Tuesdays, not by formal arrangement, simply by the quiet accumulation of the fact that Tuesday afternoons at Thornfield had become, over the past several weeks, the part of the week that both of them oriented toward without discussing it. She came with her own book and her own opinions about the restoration plans, and she made tea with the easy familiarity of a woman who had stopped being a guest, and she argued with him about architecture and literature and the correct use of the South Terrace with a directness that made the afternoons feel like something he had been waiting for, without knowing what it was he was waiting for. He came through the garden gate and saw her at the wall where the roses had opened, her hand raised, her fingers just touching one of the blooms, her face turned slightly away from him. He stopped. He watched her for a moment, in the way he had been permitting himself recently, without the old careful management of it, without turning away before he had looked long enough. She was in pale yellow today, and the afternoon light was precisely the kind that suited her, and she was entirely unaware of being observed, which meant her face was entirely undefended, and the expression on it was one he had very little practice seeing on her. She looked peaceful. She looked, he thought, and the thought arrived with a weight that settled rather than startled, like someone who had come home. He walked toward her. She heard his footsteps on the path and turned, and the expression did not disappear. It shifted into the warmer, more aware version of itself that she had, over the past weeks, stopped bothering to conceal. "You were gone longer than usual," she said. "The north pasture required more attention than Coalfield's report suggested," he said. He came to stand beside her, looked at the rose she had been touching, fully open now, deep pink, the first truly warm color in the garden. "You found the roses." "They found themselves," she said. "I merely noticed." She looked up at him. "You look better than you did in February." "I feel better than I did in February," he said. "What changed?" she asked. The question carried its own answer. She knew what had changed. She simply wanted to hear him say it. He looked at her. "You know what changed," he said. "I do," she said. "I want to hear you say it anyway." She tilted her head slightly, that precise, unhurried look she gave him, that he had spent 7 years failing to respond to correctly. "You are, as I have observed, in the process of practicing honesty. I am simply providing opportunity." "How generous of you," he said. "I thought so." He turned to face her fully. The garden was quiet around them. Birdsong somewhere in the hedges, the distant sound of the valley, the roses doing their patient work along the wall. He looked at her and felt, with a clarity that required no management, no discipline, no careful maintenance of distance, the simple and enormous fact of what she was to him. "You changed," he said. "You, being here, being present and possible, and you, Iris, you are what changed." She looked at him. The peaceful expression deepened into something richer. "That," she said softly, "was very nearly poetic." "Do not become accustomed to it," he said. "It cost me considerably." She laughed, that warm, unguarded laugh, and stepped closer to him, and he took her hand, and they stood among the opening roses in the April light, in comfortable, honest silence. Then she said, "Sebastian." "Yes." "My father would have been pleased." He was quiet for a moment. The words landed carefully in the exact place they were intended to land, in the part of him that had been carrying the promise, the weight of it, the years of inadequate keeping. "I hope so," he said. "I know so," she said. "He would have looked at you standing here, and he would have looked at me, and he would have said—" She paused, and her voice held the particular tenderness of someone quoting someone they miss. "He would have said, 'There, that is what I meant.'" Sebastian looked down at her. "He asked me to watch over you," he said. "I know," she said. "I did not do it well." "No," she agreed. "You did it very badly for quite a long time." Kay paused, and then quieter. "But you are here now." "I am here now," he said. "And you intend to stay." It was not entirely a question, but it wanted to be answered. He turned to face her fully. His free hand rose and tucked that same loose strand of hair. It was always that same strand, as though it had been coming undone on purpose, as though it had been waiting all this time for the right person to notice it, back from her face. His fingers rested at the curve of her jaw for a moment. She leaned into it, just slightly, just enough. "Iris," he said, "I have been in love with you for 7 years. I have been a fool about it for most of them. I have kept my distance when I should have crossed it, stayed silent when I should have spoken, and managed my feelings with a discipline that I now understand was not noble. It was simply afraid." He held her gaze. "I am done being afraid of this. I am done being careful with it. I intend to stay in Somersetshire. I intend to restore the North Wing. I intend to be here, precisely here, for as long as you will have me, and I would like, if you are willing, to make that formal, properly, with the full and complete honesty that I should have offered you years ago." The garden was very still. Iris looked at him, at the open, unguarded face of a man who had taken every wall he had ever built and set it down, brick by brick, over the course of one Somersetshire spring. "Are you," she said carefully, "proposing to me beside a rose bush?" "I am proposing to you beside several rose bushes," he said. I thought the setting was appropriate. Her eyes were bright. "You could have chosen the library," she said, "or the ballroom, or literally anywhere with a chair." "I thought of the library," he admitted. "Then I saw you standing here and I thought, now." Because I have spent 7 years waiting for the correct moment, and there is no correct moment. There is only the moment that is happening, and the choice to speak or not to speak, and I have made the wrong choice too many times to make it again." She looked at him for one long, still moment. The April light lay across the garden in warm, unhurried gold. "Yes," she said. One word. The simplest possible word. He exhaled, not dramatically, not with visible relief, but with the quiet release of a man setting down something he had been carrying for a very long time. His forehead dropped gently to hers. She closed her eyes. They stood there for a moment, just a moment, with the roses opening around them and the valley below, and the whole of Thornfield Hall behind them, patient and warm and full of rooms that had been closed too long and were ready now to be opened. 7 years, she murmured. 7 years, he agreed. I intend to spend considerably more than that making up for them. She pulled back just enough to look at him. You realize, she said, that I am going to remind you of this moment every time you are being too controlled and too composed and too thoroughly yourself. I am counting on it, he said. She smiled, the full, real, unguarded smile that changed her face and always had, and he kissed her, there in the garden, among the roses that had finally decided to open. It was not their first kiss. It was, in every way that mattered, their first real one, the first one without fear behind it, without 3 years of silence pressing against it, without the old, careful distance waiting to reassert itself the moment they stepped apart. When they drew back, she was still smiling. He looked at her, and Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Thornfield, a man of discipline and reserve and precisely maintained composure, smiled back, fully, without management, for the first time in 7 years. In the weeks that followed, the county of Somersetshire observed several things. That the Duke of Thornfield had taken up permanent residence at the Hall for the first time in 3 years. That Lady Iris Pemberton Mercer was seen regularly in his company, at the market, at county dinners, riding the valley roads in the early mornings with the comfortable ease of 2 people who had been doing something together for a long time. That the pearl earrings she wore at every occasion were, by all accounts, her grandmother's. And that the Duke, when he looked at her, which was often and never briefly, looked at her the way a man looks at something he had almost lost, and intends now to keep. Lady Ashton told everyone it was the most romantic thing the county had seen in years. For once, no one disagreed.
I learned before the rooms like air, 5,000 mornings standing there, folding silence in my hands like something fragile no one planned. Your footsteps pass me every day, a quiet storm that looked away. I told my heart, don't make a sound. Some things are safe and never found. But walls remember every stair, even the ones that aren't there. And when you finally look, the world shifted under my feet. 5 years of silence breaking in one heartbeat. I spent forever learning how not to need you near. But when you said my name, the walls disappeared. Now the truth is louder than every year we lost, and loving you feels like crossing a line we both knew the cost. Your house was built of careful stone, where every feeling stood alone. A king of rooms that echoed cold, afraid of truths you never told. But guilt is something time can't hide. It waits behind the quiet pride. And in the garden's trembling light, I saw your armor lose the fight. 5 chose not to see, but your silence was watching me. And when you finally looked, the night opened like a door. Every breath between us said there was more. I spent forever learning how to stand alone, but your hand in mine felt like coming home. Now the truth is louder than every year we lost in loving you. Feels like crossing a line. We both knew the cost. Maybe love is not the fire people swear it has to be. Maybe it's the quiet moment when someone finally sees. Maybe it's the breaking of a promise made to fear. Maybe it's a whisper after 5 silent years. And when you finally looked, the past fell out of place. All the invisible days found a face. I spent forever learning how to disappear, but when you said my name, I was suddenly here. Now the night remembers everything we lost, and loving you feels like crossing a line. We both knew the cost. 5 years of silence, 1 moment of truth, and the man who never looked finally saw